Hello and welcome to week 1 of trimester 3. This week we'll be looking at the causes of World War II and the U.S. entry into World War II. For this week, you can look at the following learning objectives, and these learning objectives should be answered completely by the end of the week in preparation for the final exam in the last week of trimester 3. This week, again, we will be looking at U.S. entering the World War I, or entering World War II, identifying post-war peace initiatives, discussing how war debt and reparations were affected in European nations. We'll also take a look at the relation with Latin American nations during 1930s and the buildup of the Nazi Party led by Adolf Hitler's rise to German power, and discussing militaristic Japan during the 1930s, as well as analyzing early events that historically impact the United States after World War I, and analyzing the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor. Just a quick review from trimester 2. Again, remember after World War I, there was still a Great Depression happening in the U.S., and during that time, FDR proclaimed the policy isolationism. Because again, much like World War I, we saw World War II as a European issue or affair and not a U.S. concern. Also, the effects of World War I destroyed much of all of Europe, including much of the countrysides and industries of France, as well as Germany, as well as other nations. In Russia, remember, they drop out of World War I, and during that time a Russian Revolution takes place. During the buildup into World War II, we see the second revolution where now communism and the Bolshevik Party have turned Imperial Russia into the Soviet Union. Looking at Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler, again, before happening in Italy, we see the rise of the fascist dictator Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini is going to lead a revolt in Italy led by the brown shirts. And in Germany, we see again hyperinflation, which essentially creates the rise of Hitler into power. And in Japan, we see a militaristic dictatorship where they are now taking over navies and other important militaristic infrastructures. And also in Spain, we see the fascist dictator Franco emerge. Again, hyperinflation, where much of Germany's middle class, as well as common citizen, was unable to buy affordable everyday goods such as food and energy costs. Under Nazi Party, Hitler's Nazi Party, we see that most everyone was in the military. He also had anti-Semitic policies, meaning they had blamed the entire war on the Jews and communists, and so we see anti-Semitism spread during the 1930s. In 1935, we see property ownership targeted under the Nuremberg laws imposed by the Nazi Party, and then we see Kristallnacht, the Night of the Broken Glass, and where now Jewish synagogues and businesses are attacked. Over in the Pacific Theater, we see Japan's militaristic buildup, again as already mentioned, and during this time we see the invasion of Manchuria in 1931, and again Manchuria was a disputed property between China and Japan, and then 3 years later they invade, or we see a rapid buildup, and 6 years later they invade China, where they again make an attack in Beijing. We see several acts of Germany prior to the start of World War II where many historians would look at as possible interventions that Europe nations could have created, but we see first Germany invades and occupies the area of Rhineland. Then they take an area known as Sudetenland. Then they occupy Czechoslovakia. And finally, to start the war, they attack Poland in 1939. Europe, first, when we see the occupation of Rhineland and Sudetenland, they vote for a policy of appeasement, and again, allowing Germany to correct the wrongdoings of the Treaty of Versailles, allowing them to keep the territories as long as they don't expand or take over any other territories. We see then with the attack of Poland, both Britain and France declare war on Germany. And we see the leader Joseph Stalin signs a non-aggression pact with Germany, thus creating a partnership where neither Germany or Russia or USSR would not attack one another. And U.S. once again is selling weapons to the Allied powers, much similar to what they had done in the First World War through the Lend-Lease Act. In 1941, we see U.S. entering World War I. The build-up to that is Japan invading Indochina, which is modern-day Vietnam. The U.S. responds by freezing assets, economic assets, and once they freeze economic assets, we see as a result of that Japan will attack Pearl Harbor on the day that lives in infamy, defined by FDR. And the toll on that day we see listed with 20 warships and roughly 200 planes destroyed and 2,400 casualties. Now, in conclusion to the week, please go back to the learning outcomes and respond to the following 3 questions located here in the exit slip. And again, this information will be used when completing your next task, which is your activity for week 1.